Carol Kudnick isn't even here, and I can't mute the room.
Don't blame it on Carol.
Yeah.
That's a good suggestion. I've got some of those too. I'll flip a
Amazon delivered them.
strobe light on. Yeah, maybe that's what's in the box.
I didn't really do a good job of prayer, so you have to figure them out yourself.
Phil?
Yeah.
Everybody on who's
Yes.
going to be on?
Uh-huh.
Kathy is with us this morning, and we're pleased about that. They're really, really, it's a hard time with Alton and what's going on with this. So keep them in mind. Everybody here, some of you remote have met her, but you know, you're aware of her online, but it's a really difficult time. And the same goes for our friends Phil and Cherie. Phil with the Parkinson's, aggressive Parkinson's, and Cherie's worn out from dealing with it. So I try and talk about the fact that we're part of a body and we should be here for each other. And it's easy sometimes. I think it's easier for men, but I've never been a woman, so I don't know. But to not want to be a bother, not want to say there's a problem. This I've had going for a while, this pain that I told you, the weight of a shirt. Cheryl, is Cheryl with us?
She is.
Cheryl had the same thing. Cheryl Thorpe
still has
that, and she still is living with it. And I got some medicine that helped. You know, I quit, but it went down to my legs and my back. And this last week, the pain has been so bad. There's like another, this is nerve pain, and there's another scale. You know, the normal, they ask you 1 to 10, how do you feel? There's another scale that starts at about 6 and goes up to what would be about 15. And you look at the scale, and at a certain level, it says at this level, pain is all I think about. I have set up here at night because I don't want to keep Mary up until 3 and 4 in the morning, and then just get so exhausted I get an hour and a half of sleep, and then it hurts so bad that I'm back up. A couple of nights, no sleep at all. So I'm feeling better today, which is amazing. It's the first time in a week, but you know, I'm bringing that up. I told somebody recently that when we don't share these things with each other, ask for prayers, be a part of it, the body doesn't get to be the body. So it's not fair of me to not bring that stuff to you. And I know there are others there, you know, all of you have brought different ones. We need to be faithful in our prayers for this. God, we are thankful. Even in difficult times, we recognize that you're with us. It's a thing that we can't always explain to people who don't understand. You put us here in each other's paths for a reason. We're part of a body, and we're thankful for that. And even in those difficult times, we feel the weight of that, the presence, because you're the one that binds us together. And your grace comes through us as well. We're thankful for the gifts. We tend to forget those. We tend to forget the answers to prayers. Look at answers to prayers and reject it because it doesn't seem like it's enough. We pray for our faithfulness, for our reminders that you are in control and that you love us. This study that we're going through gets difficult at times. So we ask for your words and your understanding as we go through it. Amen.
Okay, we are in Matthew, and this is week 26 of Matthew. As Scott says, we never thought it would take us a half a year to get through Matthew. And where we left off, Jesus is on the Mount of Olives, and he is with his disciples. And there's actually in religion, there's actually a term for this part of him talking to the disciples, and it's called the Olivet discourses. So he's on the Mount Mount of Olives, and he is talking to the disciples, and they've named it. So, or they also call it the last discourse. So this is the last time, as Scott said last week, you know, if you knew this was a couple of days before you were going to die and you wanted to get message across and say one last thing, that's what this is about. And he, during this time, he did some end time prophecies. And then he said, basically, don't worry about when they're going to happen because we have some work to do. And right now he is telling the disciples and us about the work we need to do. And he's doing it through parables. We did 2 parables last week. One of them was the parable of the 10 virgins, and the next one was the parable of the talents. And we're on the 3rd parable, which is the sheep and the goats. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, it's really, to me, it's important that we pay attention to the fact, as Mary said, he's only got a few days left. We see other times through the Bible, Moses knows his time's coming to an end, and he calls everybody together and gives them like this one last word. Joshua does it. I don't. There's a whole bunch of people that this is sort of an instinct for us, and it's important. There are things we want to leave the people we love with, and so the town, when Passover happens, swells to, I don't know, 10 times its normal population. There are people. It's an ant farm, and so he does these things in front of crowds, and then he goes out to a quiet place. He prefers the Mount of Olives. But it's probably a good example to us to occasionally take time to break off and get to a quiet place for prayer. But he's really instructing the 12 now. He's telling them about things. And one thing I want to mention, because all of this end time stuff just weighs us down. But at the time, we have the luxury now of also having revelations, John's revelation, what was revealed to him about the end times. They didn't have that. And so what we know is that they weren't listening to him with the benefit of revelation. So he's not telling them the stuff that John knows. He's telling them this for another reason. He doesn't expect them to then get down and parse it about 3.5 years of this and 3.5 years that and 1,000 years reign and on. That's not a part of anyone's knowledge at this point. So he's telling them something else. And I always think it's important for us to understand the lesson, especially when it's red letters, when it's someone saying, Jesus says this, to try and understand what is it that he's teaching instead of expanding it. Maybe, if you got time, do that. But first, get the message that's being brought. So I told you last week, if you really look at this big, long section of him talking about end times, it's each one of the little pieces breaks down about some servant that was left in charge of taking care of the other servants and how, you need. So I still feel like this section is not about end times. It's about the fact that there's going to come a time when he's going to come back, and he's telling them, he's preparing them, don't get caught up in that. Stay true to what it is you're supposed to be doing. So we have one more section that we couldn't get to because I did stuff like this last week and took too much time. So we're in chapter 25, verse 31. And Jesus is speaking. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat.
I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not take me in. I was naked, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. And they too will reply, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to you? Then the king will answer, truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life.
You know, it kind of speaks for itself. The idea that, you know, what you saw me hungry and you fed me. And he says, they said, well, you know, we never saw you. I don't remember ever seeing you hungry. He said, no, but what you do to the least of these others, you do to me. And that is, I realized this week going over this, that a lot of people come into, you know, churches, they come into places and they hear things like this and they focus on, look at all this stuff we're expected to do. That's just too much. Look at what it says. I don't have time for that. Instead of looking at it as, look at all these things we're expected to do, I would suggest maybe think of it in terms of, look at who we get to be in this world. We're told, you know, another point, he says, you're the salt of the earth. You're the light of the world. We get to be something in this world. We have a part, and it is different than maybe anything else. So instead of looking at this and saying, and you know, I know there are other people, because I read a lot to try and see what other people say about this, and the idea that they take political things, I'll just say what's going on at our border, and say, well, it's, you know, it's our job to feed everybody. You can't do that. God puts people in our paths. He sends people our way, and we often look at that and think, and you know, you go down the freeways in San Antonio and there are people out on the side begging for money. And every now and then I roll down my window and give them money. And they tell you don't do it. I can't say why. The kids, when they were little, said, that guy's young, he could go get a job. And I said, well, you know, if someone has fallen so far that they would rather sit on the side of the road with a sign and beg for money, they deserve some level of pity, you know, some significance. But people are sent into our lives. This is not about politics. This is not about open borders. It's not about anything else other than there are people that are put in our paths for a reason. And he's telling them, just like he's telling us, that what you do for the least of these, you do for me. And what you refuse to do for the least of these, you refuse to do for me. Now, one last thing out of this section, this idea of separation, the sheep and the goats. Put the sheep on the right hand, which is the place of honor. The left hand is the goats, not so much. And we have these long battles over, you know, does everybody get in eventually? Is everybody a part of God's kingdom eventually? Is there a separation? All I can tell you is that at some point there's going to be two groups of people, the sheep and the goats, and I don't want to be in the goat section. All right. I have an understanding from what I read that there is a separation. I absolutely believe that. But I can tell you that irregardless of how you handle that, I don't want to be in the goat section, and you probably shouldn't either. And in that context, he tells us that he looks at the one group and says, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was in jail, you came to me. And they don't even understand that they did that for him necessarily. They're humble. The other group gets told, you didn't do any of this. And you see, they do almost the same words. Wait, that's not fair. When did I not feed you? When did I not clothe you? And he says, well, you know, what you refuse to do for the least of these others, you refuse to do for me. That's the goat pile. Don't be in the goat pile. But this whole section, this is the end of it. But if you look really carefully, he talks about end times because they worry about that. But each time, there are different sections in this chapter. Each time he talks about there's going to be an end time. These things are going to happen, big things. But between now and then, you've got this job to do. You take care of your business. And if we take too much of our time trying to parse out something that's going to happen at a time that we can't possibly predict, I think it's a distraction from this. Is it bad to think about? Is it wrong? No, it's really not. If you want to know the truth, what's going on right now, some of the AI stuff and the knowledge bases, we're closer certainly than we've ever been for some of the things in Revelation to actually come true. They couldn't possibly happen before now. And people have always stuck on that. They said, there's no way they can prevent you from buying or selling anything. Well, they could now in fairly short order. So do I think that we're much, much closer? Sure. But I just don't spend time on it. Each day I wind up with something, someone in my past that I know I'm supposed to deal with. And I think that's the message of this chapter. I think that's the one I would have us take.
The one thing that when we were studying this week that hit me was this idea of purpose. It seems to be a obsession, at least with the people I interact with on a weekly basis. You know, what's my purpose? What's my purpose in retirement going to be? What is my purpose? Is my job my purpose? You know, there's books written on purpose. And I think, wow, these last two chapters sort of outline what our purpose is supposed to be, and just sort of like not having the obsession on end times, not having the obsession on the purpose. Something Scott always says is sometimes it's, we always want to do a big thing, but little things are the big things.
They are.
So, enough preaching?
Yeah.
Now, so remember, it is Wednesday. If you know, if we have the timeline that Jesus is crucified on Good Friday, it's Wednesday now. Just to wrap your mind around that. We're on chapter 26. When Jesus had finished saying all these things, he told his disciples, "You know that the Passover is 2 days away, and that the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." At that time, the chief priests and the elders of the people assembled in the courtyard of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and they conspired to arrest Jesus covertly and kill him. But not during the feast, they said, or there will be riots among the people.
So, you know, the first thing is, this is just him telling them. And I still think at this point, they think, well, you'll be handed over, but you're not really going to let him crucify you, right? I mean, that's not going to happen. But he's told them, and we're told in other places that later they remembered these things and understood. He's preparing them. But it is a sign that he has always been very aware that this is the end. It's a matter of days right now. And what Matthew does, if you've ever read a book like Tom Clancy or something, there are these big giant stories and there are things going on around the world at the same time. So each chapter, he goes from one of them to another. It's kind of confusing, but you see that things are happening while this is happening over here, this is happening over there. And Matthew just says, at that moment, at that time, he's telling them they're going to take me to be crucified. And it tells us straight out that the high priests, Pharisees and all that bunch are plotting to kill him. There's no punishment. There's no separating from his people. They want to kill him. Now, when he's crucified, it's right at the beginning of the Passover feast, and they have to take them down off the crosses. There were 3, remember, because the people, the Jews, do not want to see this during Passover. You pollute our, remembrance. So they break legs. Jesus was already dead, but they want him off of there, and they have to prep the body and get him in a tomb right away, because it can't go past the beginning of the Shabbat, the feast. And so the Pharisees and the high priest and all that bunch who are plotting say, we want to kill him. We want to do it covertly, take him covertly, because we're afraid of the people, and we can't do it during the feast or the people will rise up. So you see how things, play out. But what Matthew was just telling us, that at the same time, roughly, that Jesus is telling them, look, they're going to take me and crucify me, they are in fact sitting over here plotting to kill him.
And remember, Matthew wrote this 30 years later. And I always think to myself, he's like recalling all these things and realizing this was going on at the same time. I'm sure, and it was not, even though it was written 30 years later, he was probably writing it during those 30 years, and he was recalling how these things lined up.
Right.
Verse 6 of chapter 26. While Jesus was in Bethany, in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of expensive perfume, which she poured on his head as he reclined at the table. When the disciples saw this, they were indignant and asked, why the waste? This perfume could have been sold at a high price and the money given to the poor. Aware of this, Jesus asked, why are you bothering this woman? She has done a beautiful deed to me. The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. By pouring this perfume on me, she has prepared my body for burial. Truly, I tell you, wherever this gospel is preached in all the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her.
So way back then, perfume, they didn't have deodorant. So perfume was kind of in demand. If you were a very wealthy person, you didn't have to go around smelling as bad as everybody else. Perfume is expensive. The spices that they use to bury people, the very wealthy can afford them. We have a hard time understanding how expensive the spices were. Ordinary people couldn't even think about being able to afford it. And there are spice routes across the desert. There are people known as Nabateans, the ones who built Petra, that build these cisterns. So they have the spice route. They know how to get through the desert where other people would die. And so they control the spice trade. They're very wealthy. That's how they could afford to build Petra, the big city carved into the stone. So when this woman comes and has this alabaster jar, and she empties this perfume on him, and it is, again, we may think it's odd, but it is a sign of devotion. It is a sign of something close to worship to do this.
Can I interrupt you just real quickly? Can I read this same passage in John?
Oh, please, that's a good one, yeah.
So remember, they're in Bethany, and they're at their, like, he's at his best friend's house. I mean, this is Lazarus and Mary and Martha. This is, and so I'm in John chapter 12, and it's the same story, but it gives out a little more detail that I think is interesting.
Yep.
6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, the hometown of Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So they hosted a dinner for Jesus there. Martha served, and Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of expensive perfume made of pure nard she anointed Jesus' feet and wiped them with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was going to betray him, asked, why wasn't this perfume sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor? Judas did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to take from what was put into it. Leave her alone, Jesus replied. She has kept this perfume in preparation for the day of my burial. The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. So this is Martha that used the perfume. Sorry.
Yeah, and it, you know, it gives us some context. This idea of Judas didn't care about the poor, really. I see that, especially in our politics all the time. You know, it's about the poor people. It's not about the poor people. It's about the power. It's about the money. There's an example that I love. Some of you have heard it, but I'll mention it again. San Antonio has a thing called Christmas Under the Bridge. And these business people, very wealthy people, small group of them come out once a year. And the people who live under the bridges, they give them some gifts and they give them some food. And our daughter went to work at it, our oldest. And she talked about there was a circle of these wealthy people all sitting talking to each other, and all the poor people are over there, and all the not quite so poor people like Amanda, our daughter, are the ones serving them things. But the wealthy people never actually shook hands even. They don't want anything to do with the people who live under the bridge. They get their photos taken, they get to be shown with all the stuff that they're handing out, but they never connect at all. And it really disturbed Amanda. I mean, it was obvious enough to her that she was, you know, one of those times that opens your eyes. Having actual concern for those people is a sort of a different thing. And you see what it says that Judas didn't care about using the money to help the poor. Judas thought, here's some money I can get my hands on. He was dipping into the till. So that sort of, you know, that adds some context. People love to say that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. And I don't know where they get it from, but this is one of the things that they like to use to corroborate that. How else could she afford this big jar of perfume?
Oh, this isn't the same Mary. This isn't the same Mary.
Which Mary do you think it is? Mary and Martha?
Yeah, Mary and Martha.
It only says Mary. We don't even know.
Okay.
There are people who claim it's Mary Magdalene because this happened.
Okay, gotcha.
And I'm just saying, a lot of this stuff is so unnecessary to even speculate on. It may well be, but you remember, he's in the house of Simon the leper. Now, they're not supposed to have anything to do with lepers because they're unclean. And if you come into close contact with a leper, you're unclean. And you have to spend at least a week, probably longer, going through rituals to become ritually clean to go back into the temple. He's doing things, and that one little line goes past us. He's in the home of Simon the leper. Yeah. And they would, the important people would have a fit about him even being there. And he challenges that all the time.
And, you know, some of the things like, you know, I was saying that this is Wednesday, 2 days before, and the Gospel of John says 6 days before he went to Bethany. Realize that Bethany's right outside, I forget how many miles away, from 2 miles away. So when he came in on what we know as Palm Sunday, you know, as we said, the city is 10 times what it usually is. So every night he was probably in Jerusalem at the Mount of Olives, and he would walk back to Bethany. So that was his home base for this last week of his life. And so, you know, people tried to pick apart that the timing of the Gospels aren't exactly right. First of all, remember they're written 30 years later. But second of all, the story, they all do
tell pretty much
the same story.
But let's do look though at what she did with this perfume and what the reaction was. And Matthew makes it sound like some of the other disciples chimed in. You know, Judas says, we could have sold this for money. And the other ones go, hey, yeah, we could have. We pick each other apart in so many different ways. I've told you, I've seen churches literally split over, I don't know, a woman wore a pantsuit and whether or not women can wear pantsuits or have to wear dresses. I saw that one happen. I saw a church split over drinking coffee in the fellowship hall before Sunday school. I've seen them split over literally the paint color that was selected for the fellowship hall, basically. And they have a vote, and the vote doesn't go their way, and they get mad and they leave, and we pick each other apart. And so here's Mary that took the amount that they say the perfume is worth is probably something close to a year's wages for a worker. That's a lot of money. Even, you know, if you count minimum wage, it's a lot of money. And they, rather than look at what she's done and understand her devotion, her heart, they pick her apart. They find a way to say, well, you know, you could have done a whole lot better with your gift. That's one of the things that is part of our passion for doing this, is that we can learn that what a body means is that we don't do that to each other. That's why I told the story about the chili cook-off last week, because, you know, we pick each other apart. That's one of the things that you see. Matthew includes this because he wants us to see what happened, that Jesus says, there's nothing wrong with this. The poor will always be with you. And doesn't that sound cold-blooded? I know people that go, my gosh, the poor will always, not if we do our part. No, yeah, they will. They will. And you're going to have opportunities constantly to help people. That wasn't what this was about. It's not about the money. It was about Mary's devotion and her faith in Jesus as a Lord. So if you take anything from that section, be sure and take that. When you see people do things with their gifts, that you don't think to yourself, well, you know, what they really should have done was send out handwritten invitations, right? Not those prefab things or whatever. We shouldn't pick each other apart.
And I love when you see a section, and this story is in all four Gospels. And so when there's a story in all four Gospels, I like to go back and read them in the other Gospels just to see what other information you can get. But obviously, this is something that hit everybody since it ended up in all four Gospels. Verse 14.
You have your mic on? I don't know. Push the little button, because I like people to be able to hear.
Is the green light on, Kathy? Oh.
You guys can be patient at home just a second.
Not that important.
I know.
To me, when I read this, is Jesus is already at a whole different level. He's long gone from the physical part. And he's talking about my body, which is us, being anointed for his burial. And this, the same examples that he's been given throughout about the way life should be here as a reflection of the life is going to be in heaven. And he's been telling them, and apparently he's not convinced that the students, the disciples, have heard this, and Iscariot hasn't heard it. He's still talking money. He's not talking about the heavenly world. And so he's bringing all these examples. You got to look deeper in these things. Got to look into the faith in your heart, not the poor, not the dress, who's doing what to whom.
I think that's the message.
And we can learn from that, because maybe I didn't think about it. Hey, but I'm seeing it now. I got to get he's right. And he's been right all along.
And so what we see is that is the message. And we see that Matthew has done something from chapter 1, not that he had chapters, but from the very beginning. And this theme about being a part of the kingdom of heaven just keeps going. I mean, it is very consistent.
I was thinking too that
Mic on?
Yes. Okay, so they're in this real intimate moment. And somehow it shows you that even in that moment when Christ knows where he's going, the devil, Satan, has a way of throwing a stumbling block out there.
Scandalon.
And they jump on it. I mean, well, I don't know. One says they all said, and right. One says he, but there's a stumbling block. So he is fighting all the way to the end. He's wrestling because he's trying to redeem us from Adam's sin. And so even though there was the temptation on the mountain, to me, that was just the beginning. I mean, it keeps going, and it gets more critical because, well, who didn't care about the poor? Who doesn't care about, you know, and it's the same now. It's that same kind of a thing where you show them this, but you're really doing that in the background. And so that's
well, and that struggle, you think about it, you know, you guys know I'm a financial advisor, so I get to deal with people's money all the time. And you think of that idea of, you know, should we be worried about money, and that balance of living in this world, and the kingdom of God is here, and we're not supposed to worry about it. But I mean, you don't want to be irresponsible. I mean, it's that balance, and that, as you said, the devil, or that temptation to take it back to yourself and say, hey, you know, I mean, what bottom line, even if it's not Judas, if it's the rest of the disciples, hey, we have a mission to do, and we could have used that perfume, that money, she could have sold it, and we could do more of our mission. I mean, how many times do we could do something else with our money?
It's never about the money, ever. And the idea that the poor will always be with you, you know, you can take it a bad way if you want to, but he's speaking fact. And there are times that individuals are put in our path, and that's our job. We aren't here to change the whole world. And I guess one of the things that I remind people of periodically is Jesus came, and he didn't stop all this stuff. He says, I'm coming back, and when I do, it's all going to get put right. For now, it's on you. You're going to do, you know, you're going to do your part. And I think there are reasons for that. But he came, and he didn't wipe out all the injustice, and he gave the tools to wipe out the injustice, and we don't always make good use of them. But no, those are all good points.
Verse 14. Then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priest and asked, what are you willing to give me if I hand him over to you? And they set out for him 30 pieces of silver. So from then on, Judas looked for an opportunity to betray Jesus.
I do want you to notice the way Matthew puts these two things together, and it's not an accident. Judas is known as Iscariot. I'm convinced there's one other school of thought on that, but that word Iscariot is from a word Sicarii. They are assassins. They're revolutionary assassins. And I've mentioned before that in Spanish, the word for a hitman is Sicario. And that's who Judas is. I think that's the prevalent belief. But you see, Judas is worried about the money. Judas is greedy. And Judas, if that's correct, and he's one of these zealot, you know, people who want to take over violently, take over Rome, then what he's imagining is that if Jesus is the Messiah, he's going to be the leader of a revolution, kind of like the Maccabees. That's what he's following. And
that's how he started off.
He keeps wondering, all right, when are you going to do this? At this point, when he sees Jesus do this, I think he says, you know what? This is not the guy. Anybody who would do that, who's not raising a war chest, you know, because if you're in that position, if you're a televangelist, you can solicit money and get a lot of people to give it. And Jesus certainly with those crowds could have said, hey, let's start handing in some money here and we'll raise an army. I think Judas sees that, realizes this is not the Messiah he's been looking for, and immediately goes to the Jewish leaders and says, what do you give me to turn him over to you? And remember, they're looking for a private, quiet place. And he says, I think I can make that happen. What do you give me? And they settle on 30 pieces of silver. 30 pieces of silver is the price of a slave. It's an insult, really, for them to say, here's 30 pieces of silver. If you accidentally kill in this time, and it actually is not just in this time, it goes all the way back to Leviticus, I think. If you accidentally kill a slave that belongs to someone else, you have to pay the owner 30 pieces of silver. It's specified way back in the law. And so they say, we'll pay you so you see what's going to happen. And they're looking at them like slaves. And they're saying, we'll offer you the same thing we would offer for a dead slave, 30 pieces of silver. It's not a coincidence. It's not a small thing. And you want to talk about how much money it is in today's money. Doesn't matter. What is happening here, though, they pick that number for a reason, and they know it. Everyone's real familiar with it. And he offers to betray him because he's of no use to me. I'm looking for somebody that'll come up and be a military leader. Yes.
It also makes me think about we're coming to the fruition of the whole thing. Jesus' life is coming to the fruition, but so is Judas, because when he picked Judas, Judas said, "Nah, I don't. Are you sure you want me?" Remember, he did. I mean, there was he never was part. He was picked, but and Christ told him, "Kind of really need you." We're getting to the fruition of why he really needed him, because he needed a guy like that to be able to do what he was going to do with no remorse.
Kind of scary. He picked somebody knowing that was his job. Yeah,
that was his job.
This whole thing has been the single focal point of the whole time he's been here. And as he moves into these last days, he goes at it with a purpose. And so, whether I'm right or wrong, it certainly makes sense that that's who Judas is and that he would have done this.
And I mean, I'm jumping a little bit, but when you go to the Last Supper and he goes, "Don't you have something to do?" To Judas?
Yes.
Well, why are you sitting here with us? You had something. Honey, you had something important to do.
He literally tells him.
He literally tells him.
Go, you're going to betray me. What you have to do, go and do quickly.
Yeah.
And the amazing part is he does it. A lot of people would have been so intimidated by that. Oh my gosh, does he know? I better get. Instead, he gets up and goes and does it. This was the plan. It was always the plan. Yes, sir.
Is this the only place in the Bible where this betrayal, the money in exchange for, whatever happened, is mentioned, or is there other places?
There are other places.
It's the first time I've read.
It is in Mark. Let's see, Mark 14, 10 and 11. Let me see if I can find that. Mark 14, 10 and 11. Let's see what it says.
I think it may be in all four because I'm pretty sure Luke mentions it. Does he specifically say 30 pieces of silver? I think he does.
Here is Mark's version. Mark chapter 14, verse 10. Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted to hear this, and they promised to give him money. So Judas began to look for an opportunity to betray him. And then it's not in John, it's in Luke.
Luke, I think
Luke 22, 3 and 6. 22.
Well, she's looking that up, but do remember John said about he's the one that just got through saying about the money for the oil, that it wasn't really about helping the poor. It was about Judas wanting the money. So, but this one piece.
Yeah, 22. I'm in Luke 22, verse 3. Then Satan entered Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12. And Judas went to discuss with the chief priests and the temple officers how he might betray Jesus to them. They were delighted and agreed to give him money. Judas consented and began to look for an opportunity to betray Jesus to them in the absence of a crowd.
So the only place the 30 pieces of silver, but it's mentioned in the other Gospels. Is it kind of interesting that Matthew, the tax collector, mentions the exact amount? Maybe it's coincidence.
Okay, so I'm on chapter 26, verse 17. On the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover?" He answered, "Go into the city to a certain man and tell him that the teacher says, my time is near. I will keep the Passover with my disciples at your home." So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them and prepared the Passover.
We talk about miracles, you turn water into wine, you do these things. But this is Passover. And the idea that there's a place that isn't committed, that somebody, hasn't rented the ballroom for Passover, it's pretty slim. I worked for a company headquartered in Augusta, and every year at the Masters, they rented out their homes and went to the Bahamas for a week and came back and they nearly paid their mortgage for the year. On these big events, everything's booked. Holiday weekends, everything's booked. So for Passover in Jerusalem to have a place that's not committed is amazing. And when he says go into the city, which tells you they're still out of the city, and go to a certain man, and all that gets used. That's a term that in Hebrew sort of translates into so and so, such and such. We're not told who it is. Doesn't matter. Go to this place, talk to the guy, and just say, my master will be celebrating Passover in your place. And he says, okay, it is. Is that a miracle? Well, to me, it is. To me, it's uncanny that it could have happened this way, and that's what we get told.
And the Feast of Unleavened Bread versus the Feast of the Passover?
Yeah, the Passover people a lot of the time don't understand there are two feasts that are back to back. And we have the Passover, and then we have like a week-long Feast of Unleavened Bread. And they often refer to, they call them both Passover. They call them both the Feast of Unleavened Bread. You kind of have to be careful there because they're right. It's like Rockport and Fulton. If I say something about Rockport and I'm sitting in Fulton, nobody's going to, blow up on me.
So the purpose of the Feast of Unleavened Bread was remembrance of when they left Egypt and they had to do it quickly. And Jesus told Moses, get your people and go. And they did not have time to have the bread rise. And the Feast of the Passover is the commemorance of the fact at the last plague.
The death of the firstborn, yeah.
The death of the firstborn. God told Moses, tell the people to kill a lamb and use the blood from the lamb and take hyssop, which is an herb, and they showed a picture on one of the things we watched that the hyssop branch, it really looks like a sweat or what
paintbrush.
A paintbrush. And they would wrap the ends of it to make it a handle, and they would take the blood of the lamb and put it on the lintel above the door and on the two doorposts. And whoever did that, go back into your home, and then the angel of death was going to get the firstborn of anybody's house that did not have that. So that was a commemorance of the Passover.
That's a lot of history.
I'm sorry.
No, that's pretty cool. What's important about that, though, why is it important to us? Because we see that going all the way back, there have been these foreshadowings. There have been things. Jesus comes to be crucified at Passover. He is literally the spotless lamb. And the parallel between the two shouldn't be lost on us. We're intended to see that. He's called the Paschal sacrifice, which is the lamb. So this was all, this was what's intended for it to happen at this time, because it ties together what's been going on from the beginning.
And it does the bridge.
It does do the bridge. Yes, it does. You're absolutely right. It is exactly that. And if we're wise enough to see that and realize this is a long plan and we never deviate from it, even when we don't, we may not recognize it, it's an amazing thing for us.
Verse 20. When evening came, Jesus was reclining with the 12 disciples. And while they were eating, he said to them, truly I tell you, one of you will betray me. They were deeply grieved and began to ask him one after another, surely not I, Lord. Jesus answered, the one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. But woe to that man by whom he is betrayed. It would be better for him if he had never been born. Then Judas, who had betrayed him, said, "Surely not I, Rabbi." Jesus answered, "You have said it yourself." While they were eating, Jesus took bread, spoke a blessing, and broke it, and gave it to the disciples, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body." Then he took the cup, gave thanks, and gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine from now until the day when I drink anew with you in my Father's kingdom." And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives.
John goes into more detail about the Last Supper. And it's, there's some beautiful things in there. Matthew was much more to the point, and he just
Luke does.
well, Luke does too, but so does John.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, I'll get back to it.
Okay.
But you see that he says straight out, one of you is going to betray me. Do you think it's odd that the 12 people start saying, "Surely not me," right? Does that say anything to you that people would worry that do they have thoughts of that? Are they just so do they feel like we don't have a choice in this world, we're sock puppets, and I'm going to do something I don't even want to do? But you also see Judas, who's already gone and talked to them. He's already made up his mind, going, he knows what they're saying. He said, "Oh, surely not me." It's a kind of an enlightening encounter. And he finally just says, "Yeah, you said it yourself. Yeah, it's you." And he does it anyway. He gets up and goes. You want to stop there?
Well, and one of the things that on one of the sermons we listened to this week that I thought was interesting was talking about the one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. And remember, they didn't eat with forks and knives and spoons. They ate they would take a piece of bread, dip it into the bowl that had the hummus or whatever into it. And one of the things they were saying is meals were an intimate activity. They didn't go to restaurants. They had a meal, and meals lasted for hours. And it was this intimate activity where you did this. And what he was saying is, one of you who is close to me is going to betray me. And so asking, is it me? They thought to themselves, they knew it was someone that was going to be intimate with him, that had followed him. And so, growing up, I always, we see these movies or these pictures of this Last Supper. And I'm always thinking, so did he just stick his hand in with Judas and did nobody else notice? I'm always trying to figure out how it went. But what the story was, everybody was dipping their bread in the bowls with him. And everybody was having this intimate thing. So saying, "Is it me?" He had said,
Judas knew. Judas knew
it was him.
And the rest of them are sitting there puzzled, but he and Judas are having a little private moment because they both know. And he's letting them know that. Can we stop here?
Yes.
So tell you a quick story. Maybe two real quick. Our job of being salt and light, there's a woman who works at HEB who brings in the carts. Do you know her? She wears the hat. She works like a piston in an engine. I mean, she just goes and goes.
You see the young guys, and they've got their earbuds in, and they're not doing anything. She's got a list of thing of
doesn't matter how hot it is.
Cold.
And I have said before, she's kind of my hero. We've got a son who's living on the streets, who, by the way, remember in your prayers, it's gotten worse. But if he were a cart person at HEB doing that, I'd be proud of that. We tend to look and say that's about as low of a job as you can get. But we think things like that. And I told her, I said, you're sort of my hero. I've said, in fact, I have told Peter, I wish you would be like her. You can learn from this. It's been a while back. And she smiled. You can see the appreciation of that. And she says, well, give credit to God. Oh. But our place in this world of being salt and light Those things are who we are. And to do that, to bring some of that to these people, is what we are charged with. Those are the things. But I'll tell you one other quick one. I was going out in a boat one morning. I was over at the Fulton dock, and I'm getting the boat. I've got it tied up, getting stuff in. And there's a guy there. I think he's Vietnamese, but maybe not. He is Asian. And he's sitting on the dock. He's got a little thing of shrimp, and it's like a Zebco 202, you know. And I said, "Do you catch any fish?" And he looks at me, and the joy on his face is amazing. And he says, "Fish." We know one word in common. It's fish. He heard it. And fish. And he's got this big grin. And I think, what I need to do is just tell him, "Come with me. Just hop in the boat and come with me." And I sit there thinking, well, what if I don't find fish today? Well, what if he doesn't know how to cast one of these kinds? But it doesn't look like he's going to know what to do with a lure, because he fishes with dead shrimp. And what if he falls out of the boat? What if, I can't communicate with him? We know one word in common, and it's fish. Okay. And I talked myself out of it. And I knew at the time that I should have taken it. Can't explain it. But I got in the boat and I started out. It's a no-wake zone, I'm going slow. And I got a little out of the dock. And I said, and I turned around and I went back and he was gone. And I've told this a few times. And each time someone listening has said, "You were sent there for him." And I say, "No, he was sent there for me." This idea of being salt and light, and I got a comment last week. Sometimes I do choke up when you see God move. It is a thing that has an effect. But we are given those kinds of opportunities weekly, all the time. People are sent in our path, and this is our job. That's what he's telling us. There's going to be a time when I'm going to come back. I'm going to set all this other stuff straight. But until then, what you do to the least of these, you do to me. That's what I think most of this is about. Anything else? No. God, you've given us a purpose. You've given us a place. You've left words behind that tell us that. We often feel like the world is big and we're small, and what could we do anyway? And you give us opportunities that we're capable of handling, things that we're capable of doing. And you actually tell us that each one of them matter, that we have a job of a steward that's in charge of the resources here, the people. And our job is to be salt and light to them. Remind us of that this week as each of us go out, as we see those opportunities, even if it's just a word, that we're reminded that you put these people in our paths for a reason, and that we're up to the task. These people that we pray for, we continue to remember. I neglected Peter at the beginning, and he certainly needs help. He needs you to put people in his path, as we've seen has happened. But there are so many people that we're hurting. There are so many people who are concerned. Give us the heart that remembers to go and bring your grace and comfort to them. Amen.
Amen.
Ooh, that was close.
Catch it?
I did.
That was a water bottle. Well, you guys have a good week. Stay warm. Sherry, I will see you tomorrow morning in San Antonio. We've got AKO, which is my definition of Mary Kay for financial advisors this week. So anyhow, rah, rah. See you
Be
tomorrow
careful
morning.
driving over, Mary.
Hi, Dad.
Okay. Have a good week.
Bye.
Guys.
Thank y'all. Have a good week.